The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the second day of this 7-day sesshin here in New Mexico at Mountain Gate. In June 2024. And I'd like to bring up a subject today that is all but universal all over the world, and there aren't so many statistics about other countries, but there are plenty in the United States and in Canada. It is about abandonment. You've heard before in different teishos about what are known as adverse childhood experiences. And it turns out that 2/3 of Americans have had adverse childhood experiences, often as children. And I'd like to share with you some of the specific information on these studies that I've gleaned from the web. They're all from official sites, but nothing is from any personal sites or anything but quite official sites. But let me share with you some of the findings. Abandonment trauma. And this is why abandonment is so significant. Abandonment trauma refers to the intense emotional response and related behaviors that being neglected, emotionally or physically abused, have on you, regardless of your age. Regardless of your age. And I would add also that if you have had adverse childhood experiences, specifically abandonment, but really any of the others of the now 10 listed adverse childhood experiences, then it's even greater impact. That 2/3 number is if you've had just one type of adverse childhood experience. But often if there is one, there's more than one. And increasingly it's known that as prominent as child abuse is, many of us as we grow into adulthood find ourselves drawn to spiritual practice. This is a known factor of trauma. Let me continue. Significant abandonment includes, hang on a second. It's very faint type, so it's hard to read. Significant abandonment includes, or incidents can cause a great deal of emotional pain. They can also impact the way you relate to others and how you perceive yourself. And these are inhibiting factors in being able to live a full and happy life. Trauma results from experiencing or perceiving any type of abandonment that may have been extremely painful for you. It may be related to instances when you felt neglected, threatened, or left behind. Independent of the movie, I guess there are two of them, where the 8-year-old kid is one member of quite a large family, and as they're racing to get ready to go to Europe, he's overlooked. And so he finds himself home alone, which is the name of the movie, and has all kinds of fun adventures. If that were exactly the case, where someone was overlooked, I don't think it would be fun adventures. They would find themselves in anguish at being left behind. Physical isn't the only event that may be traumatic. Emotional abandonment may also have a great impact on both children and adults. This can include growing up in a family that is distancing. I would also add growing up in a family that is violent. Ghosting, which is a relatively new term, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Ghosting from family members, romantic partners, or loved ones, or experiencing emotional abuse at any age. Rejection stings. I think that's an understatement, especially when you have no idea why. Whatever happened, happened. When I was in high school, I was always the last person to know when some boyfriend I had simply become disinterested. That's ghosting. They just disappeared. It's also when I was in the first couple of grades of school, and every kid in the school had a red jacket that year. I went home and asked for a red jacket. Instead, my mother made me a green coat. Not being part of a group is traumatic. This is why shunning is so effective. We don't need to go into the genetic basis for this, but there seems to be a genetic basis for it. When the only attention you get is to be punished for something you have no idea what you did wrong, and the rest of the time you're invisible, it leaves you with a big hollow hole in your middle, a deep angst, a strong, deep desire for connection. And no matter how you try, that connection doesn't happen. Part of that is because you may be in an environment where it's not something that will happen, an abusive situation, for example. But also, when we are abandoned, as it's said in these as it's said in these readings, you're not sure whether you're acceptable in society. And it impacts how you interact with people, often dissociating as a way of escaping from what could be another painful experience, or in my case, when somebody would ask me a question, for example, instead of telling them what I would ordinarily have told them if I wasn't traumatized, I say something that appears to me to be what they want to hear. And so I was living a life as a fake. There was ghosting all the way through my growing up. And eventually I created a shell around myself. I knew it would happen. Every year for Christmas, I'd be asked what I'd like for Christmas. And I would be very specific about it. One year I remember we just returned from overseas, and there were these beautiful geometric black and brown towels, bath towels, designed by Yves Saint Laurent. And I was really taken with them. So I asked for a set of those towels for Christmas. Well, I got towels, but they were purple, red, and yellow flowers. Things like that, where it's as if you're invisible. You don't count. It doesn't matter what you want, even when you've been asked and told. It doesn't come. Another slap. So as we grow with these experiences, and I mean, we've been impacted by them, and we grow up sort of torqued as a result of our self-perceptions and our desperate desire to be known, to be recognized, to be real in a sense. And as we said in the very beginning, a high proportion of those of us who've experienced these kinds of things find ourselves drawn to spiritual practice, including Zen practice. Hopefully we're also drawn to therapy, because the right kind of therapy can make an enormous difference. And especially when it's combined with Zen practice, with meditation. The thing about the meditation is that we gradually clarify our mind, which means the layers of conclusions, of thoughts, ideas, misperceptions that cloud our true nature and prevent us from really understanding who and what we really are, begins to thin out. And as it begins to thin out, we begin to recognize the superficial problems, and then we begin to get down to a place in our mind where it's almost as if the lid comes off of everything we've repressed. And in order to survive abandonment trauma, one of the most important things we have to we suppress is a negative view of ourselves. Because, as is well known, children who are abused assume that they wouldn't be abused if they were good enough. There must be something wrong with them that they're being treated the way they're being treated. And so we internalize that, and it's not a comfortable thing to think about or to have any experiences around. And so we kind of stuff it away in a corner, mostly out of sight, but it still impacts us. And when it begins to be uncovered through Zen meditation, it can be extremely challenging. In the Zendo, it's something we've spent our life, however long it is to that point, trying to avoid, trying to get away from, trying to deny. And yet, boom, there it is, first faintly and then more clearly in front of our faces. And it requires work, careful attention. At that point in time, it's especially important to begin working with an appropriate therapist. Another one of the things that's effective, quite effective in Zen practice, is to do ongoing loving kindness meditations towards yourself, which is something that's very difficult for people to manage if they have a history of abuse. We feel like we don't deserve it. And yet this hollow, empty place within yearns to be filled with love. Loving kindness can take us a long way toward filling that hole with genuine respect, honor, and love. So if anyone is feeling in any way challenged in life, particularly feeling not good enough, which isn't always conscious, then to do the loving kindness meditations on a regular basis, twice a day, before you go to bed every night and as soon as you wake up in the morning. It will gradually begin to shift your assumptions about yourself into more positive, appropriately positive light. Because the conclusions we draw when we are abused or abandoned are not accurate. Every human being deserves honor, respect, joy, and happiness, without exception. And doing frequent loving kindness meditations, the meditations, can go a long way towards helping us become willing to accept that for ourselves. And so if you have difficulty when you do the loving kindness meditation, and it always has to be towards yourself before it goes towards anybody else. Otherwise, it cannot be effective. Because if you cannot respect and love yourself, it's impossible to do so with others. You're overriding something that's important not to override. And unconsciously, that overriding will produce some negative outcomes. For example, you may end up speaking in a derogatory tone to people without realizing it, because that's how you feel about yourself. And so instead of feeling it yourself, you turn it around and focus on others. When that happens, or if it happens, then it's important to use the felt sense to go into your body and feel how that discomfort feels. You're not trying to analyze it. You're not trying to do anything except experiencing it. No need for comment. And the most important thing is to actually experience it. Not to tell yourself what it feels like, but to actually feel it. That is a very effective antidote for pretty much anything in life and in Zen practice. Another thing that can happen as a result is something that's called transference. The abusers, for example, sometimes they are significant family members who one feels one ought to love, even if they're doing awful things to you. And yet, back down within yourself, there is certainly rage. No one should be treated like you're being treated. That's quite true. And so you stuff it, and when anybody else is anything like in appearance, in energy, in location, in clothing, enters your life, you transfer the rage onto that person. Another thing to recognize about that, because rage is so negative and considered so negative, that when we are enraged and have a very good reason for it, we stuff it, and then it becomes depression. That's a known phenomenon. So I only bring these things up because these are things that can definitely come up in Zen practice. And if they do, it's really important, if you're to become free of the tyranny of them, if you're going to be able to experience yourself fully and not as a hollow ghost, it's vital to work with them. This is behind a lot of the kinds of things that can come up for people in Zazen. And the second day is often the day when a lot of the stuff can erupt. As we grow more and more deeply into our practice, including working on any of those kinds of things that come up for us, we are much less moved around by them in an honest way. We're not manipulated by them. We are beginning to become free of them. So this teisho is essentially about alerting people to what can have an effect on our Zen practice as a result of particularly abandonment trauma. But any other kind of trauma as well, but especially abandonment trauma. And there are wonderful ways to work with it through the practice. And of course, there are many, many people out there who are well trained in helping people work with trauma. And I urge you, if you find any resonance with this, to do that work, to get that help, because no one should have to live like that. No one should have to live essentially in a cave, yearning for love. This is kind of a short teisho, but that's okay. It has a lot to absorb, and it will make a big difference in our life and in our Zen practice if we understand it and work with it. One thing about that, it is that it can take a long time before a person actually recognizes that they have trauma, that they have abandonment trauma in particular, because we try to shut out these kinds of things when we're kids. I was in my 40s before someone said to me, you know, you're traumatized. You've had emotional trauma. And I thought, what? Because our family was so not exactly closed off. We had a public face and a private face. The private face is where the trauma happened. And then the other thing is we moved around so much that there was nobody really familiar with us until I got into high school. So beware of the potential. If you find yourself getting extremely angry, for example, in sesshin, investigate it, because there's likely something important behind it that can be worked with, and you can become free of it. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.